Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the latest LSA webinar, the online reputation gap, what businesses think versus what consumers expect. And I'm excited to be here with one of our favorite CMOs, Monica Ho, talking about some new research that we jointly did and the results of that research, which we're also going to share in a report that we'll talk about a little bit later. So just some preliminary stuff. You can access the slides to this webinar, the rebroadcast on our archive page. Also, attendees will get access within 48 hours. So that means pretty much on Monday, you'll get an email with a link to the replay of this webinar. Shameless plug, LSA 19, our big annual conference is coming up in February on the February 25th to the 27th in Dana Point, which is in Orange County, California, Southern California, if it still exists after the fires. No, I'm just kidding about that. Monica will be speaking in addition to a lot of great industry leaders, thought leaders, and provocative speakers. And now I'm going to turn it over to Monica to introduce the research, and then I'll get into it after she sets it up.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And thank you to everyone that's joining us on the phone today. I think we've got some really exciting new research to share. But prior to diving into the data, I did want to do a little bit of a setup. So today we're talking about the online reputation gap, what businesses think versus what consumers expect. And I guess the reason why we did this research, and it should be no news to anybody on the phone, but over the past few years, there have been some significant changes in the space that have made ratings and reviews a lot more prominent in a lot of different areas. They no longer just exist in siloed review sites, but they're now being incorporated into sites such as Google My Business, as well as the powerful social media sites like Facebook. And as a result, the visibility and usage of this type of information by consumers has really skyrocketed. And this is the reason why we wanted to look at the importance of ratings and reviews, not only to consumers, but do the businesses understand just how important this type of information is becoming in determining where consumers are going to place their dollars. We also have found in the past that ratings and reviews are now one of the top ranking factors in local SEO. So it's just such a powerful piece of information that exists out there. Like all user-generated content, it requires oversight and management. And so this research, what we were looking to try and answer, as I mentioned, is just the importance of ratings and reviews and other types of information in the purchase process, how much emphasis businesses are placing on online reputations and the act of managing them. Do they understand what they should be doing? Do they understand the best practices? And then if there is a gap between what consumers are hoping for in regards to this information versus what businesses are actually doing, what are those gaps and how should a business try to resolve those issues? So that's what we're going to be diving in today. The research is actually based on two recent surveys that we conducted in August. We had a consumer survey where we polled nearly 400 online U.S. adults, and then we had a business survey where we asked 315 local business owners about their understanding of their ratings and reviews and the impact it has on their business. So some of the key findings from the research, so this is just kind of a 30,000-foot overview, but when I turn this over to Greg, he'll get into all the details here. On the consumer side, as we thought, ratings and reviews are huge, and they're actually becoming the #1 influence on consumer purchase decisions, trumping information like a convenient location, pricing, and discounts. Over 7 out of 10 consumers read reviews every time or almost every time prior to making a purchase. And more than half of these consumers want to see at least 4 stars, a 4-star rating on a business before even considering that business as a place that they would want to do business with. So this type of information is having a tremendous impact on businesses and the revenue that they could, realize from consumers that are, doing online research and leveraging this type of information. On the business side, businesses really understand that their online reputation is important, but where we're seeing a pretty big gap is the degree of importance. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more deeply. There are a significant percentage of businesses that really aren't meeting consumer expectations when it comes to things like, if a consumer posts a review, are they commenting back? Are they, trying to manage their reviews within a certain star rating? Those type of things is what we'll cover today. A little bit of a startling statistic of the survey that we did, almost half of the businesses reported that they didn't really have a review strategy, which is probably why some of these expectations are not being met today. And overall, I think, just looking at how important this type of information is to consumers making business decisions, really, not managing this information correctly can just have a tremendous impact on businesses from, the type of visibility that business is going to receive. Again, I kind of mentioned it up front, but these ratings and reviews are now a very powerful ranking factor in local SEO. And it can in fact affect all the way through to revenue, where businesses are now just being passed up if they're not making the ratings mark and meeting consumers' expectations. So hopefully through today's webinar, we'll be able to share some really great data and insight as to, what are the critical areas that we're seeing these gaps, and what can businesses do to fix these. So with that set up, I'll go ahead and turn this back over to Greg, who will walk us through the details of the research.
Okay, great. Thanks, Monica, for that setup. When we started this, we talked about it pretty extensively, and we had some operating assumptions about what the responses would be. And the idea of the parallel survey is really to match consumer and business understanding and responses. And so, as Monica previously indicated, most consumers are doing online reputation research, looking at ratings and reviews, with almost every time. This is general online research. This is not ratings and reviews. We see this consistently throughout all the surveys. People are looking online for information and then mostly purchasing offline. This slide just validates that proposition. But here's the dramatic finding that among a range of variables that influence consumer purchase behavior, ratings and reviews was the top one. So again, as Monica indicated, above discounts, above location, above word of mouth from a friend or colleague, and other variables that you can see on there. This is intuitive, but this is kind of empirical documentation of this. And then when we asked people, if you had to pick one, what is the most important factor in your decision-making? It's reviews. The others were pick multiple categories. So, and it's by a pretty decent margin. So, this is reinforcing this proposition that it's critical to have an online review strategy. So, as Monica previously said, 71% of consumers are reading reviews every time or almost every time they go online to do some kind of research. And here's the hierarchy of websites that they're looking at. And there have been numerous other surveys with different figures, precise numbers, but this is very consistent. These surveys are pretty consistent. Google now appears to be the dominant site that people look at for online reviews and consumer input into businesses. Amazon, Facebook, Yelp, TripAdvisor, and so on. So this is sort of the areas. Amazon is obviously about products and it's not about services, but it just shows how critical Amazon is in the product purchase process. And then Facebook and Yelp are tied here. So this is a kind of an interesting finding. It reveals almost the kind of methodology that consumers are using as they go through these online review sites to take a look at businesses for consideration. So most people will look at most recent reviews, recency, And then they look equally at favorable and critical reviews. And I think for everybody listening, this is probably intuitively correct. People want to see what the positive remarks are, and then they also want to see what the negative remarks are. This is why it's important to have a response to some of the critics that show up. You know, you need to address those because this is what people are looking at. And then they're looking at the volume of reviews, the total star rating, and then there's sort of other miscellaneous. But this is kind of a process that seems to be used in the aggregate that people are going through. So it really argues in favor of continuing to collect reviews on an ongoing basis. This is about recency, responding to reviews, and then making sure that, to the extent that is possible, that star ratings cross certain thresholds, and we'll talk about that later. No, we'll talk about it right now, in fact. So this is an earlier point that was made. 54% want to see at least 4 stars, 4 or more stars to consider a business. So that's a pretty high bar. If you go onto Yelp and you look at general restaurant reviews, you know, there are a lot of 3.5 star businesses out there. And we have a corresponding response for business owners for most of these, so that we're going to get into that a little bit later and talk about how they saw these issues. So this is also quite significant. More than half of consumers have decided not to use a business for lack of stars, right? So if you don't meet a certain threshold, you're not going to get considered. And this translates into real dollars lost because the reviews weren't sufficiently positive. This is an interesting slide because it goes to consumer motivations. There's a lot of, especially among small businesses, but this is also true in certain brand contexts. There's a perception that consumers write reviews when they're angry, and it's pretty widespread. And sites like Yelp have tried to contradict that over time by showing the distribution of reviews on their site. And I think this is true in a lot of research that I've seen, that overwhelmingly the bulk of reviews are going to be positive. So if you asked every single one of your customers, or if a business asked every single one of its customers to write a review just without any kind of screening process, they would find on balance that those reviews are positive. So as we see here in this slide, almost half, 47% by a large margin, are writing reviews because they had a good experience. And that's a much smaller number that had a bad experience. And then we see a smaller number that are doing so because they were asked to by the business. And then interestingly, and this may fall into a sort of a gray zone between positive and negative, 12% were writing reviews because they're making recommendations for improvement. This could be critical, could be criticism, but it could also be feature recommendations or requests, right? I'd like to see this, or it would be great if you were open, you know, on Sunday night or something. So this is important feedback for businesses to consider in running, you know, in their operation. And that's another less well recognized reason, or it's not as focused on the idea that you're getting really valuable feedback from your customers that may translate into material improvements in how you operate. This area is quite interesting. So when people write critical reviews, they have a complaint, they have some problem that they want addressed. They really want a response, and they want a response within 24 hours. There's a kind of a emerging best practice that you need to respond to reviews within 24 hours. This validates that. In some cases, people want an immediate response. I guess if the circumstances are significant enough that the consumer feels they need an immediate response. But most people, the largest group, are going to want a 24-hour or less time frame. And then, a smaller number of people are more, let's call it, relaxed about it. But this is the best practice. Respond within 24 hours or less, depending on the content. This may be the single most significant finding in my mind from the study, although we could discuss that. Almost 90% of people who write a critical review or express a problem or complaint are open to changing that review if the business addresses it. So, in other words, if there's a sincere attempt to remedy the problem or respond, that person may turn around and improve that review. And we see evidence of that in different situations. And there are case studies where that can be quite effective. It's a if you transform a bad situation into a positive one, that's in some ways even better than if somebody had written a positive review from the outset. But this is a really significant data point, because if you're not monitoring your reputation, if business owners are not looking at this and not responding in a timely way, they're going to miss out on this opportunity, which goes to star ratings, which goes to rankings, which goes to consumer spending behavior, as we talked about. So this now shifts into the small business responses to these questions. So we're now going to sort of compare what the business owners thought to what we just saw from the consumers. First, the obligatory, where do you spend your money, or what marketing methods do you use? Social media was number one. Websites are number two. This has been true for a little while. It previously was search optimization. People used to say, I want to show up in search results. That's the most important thing for me to do. Now, social media is the top category, and this is consistent across a number of surveys that we've done and that I've seen. And there's a longer discussion about small business and social media usage, but this is just to establish where they're putting their time and effort and resources. Now, are you working with some sort of consultant or agency or marketing firm? The vast majority say no. This is very consistent in a small business context with what we see again and again and again. They're trying to do it themselves, and they're doing it with varying degrees of success, mostly not successfully. Of course, which social site are you focused on, which is most important? By a pretty decent margin, Facebook, and then Google Plus is going away, of course. But then after that, well, Instagram is probably in here somewhere. We don't have Instagram on here, but it's Facebook by and large. So this is going to be if you have to concentrate, that's the place to concentrate. How often do you post on social media? The average frequency is weekly, with some people doing it daily and others doing it less frequently. And Monica's in a much better position to talk about best practices there if she wants to get into that than I am. So we asked business owners, how much of an influence on being selected by consumers is your online reputation? Do you consider it to be a strong influence? And a pretty substantial percentage, the majority in fact, agreed with that statement. So they recognize that their ratings and reviews are having a major impact on consumer decision making. But what's more interesting in a way is this block on the right, where a significant minority, almost 40%, are either confused or they disagree. So when we say neither agree nor disagree, that to me indicates confusion or uncertainty, or no opinion, which is another form of confusion. Agree and disagree and strongly disagree are smaller numbers, but in the aggregate, the bulk of these three bars here add up to a pretty substantial group of businesses that really are not getting the fact that reviews and their online reputation is exercising such a strong influence on their bottom line. To the point of responding to reviews and the timeliness of that, business owner, how quickly do you respond to consumer reviews? And on the left, we see a pretty healthy group that are, again, about 60%. This is probably the same group that we saw on the previous slide, doing it the right way, that are responding within 24 hours or more quickly than that. But again, comparable percentage, 40% kind of being lazy or complacent or indifferent. I respond within a few days. When I can get to it, I don't respond. 20% don't respond. Now that may be because they don't know how to respond. It's awkward for them. Whatever the reason, this is a huge mistake. Everybody in this group not responding or not responding fast enough is a major mistake that represents lost opportunity. To the point about reviews strategy, how do you grow the volume of reviews? Now, this is really an imperative now because of recency being a ranking factor for Google and also for consumers. They want to see recent reviews. They want to see enough reviews. How do you grow this volume? The people that are proactively doing this are asking their customers. They're verbally asking them or an email. Some of them are offering incentives, which is generally regarded as a negative, certainly at Yelp and elsewhere. I think at Google also it violates their terms if people are being paid essentially. And then there's the whole problem of the Federal Trade Commission. This may be a violation of FTC rules if it's not disclosed. There are instances where people run contests to get reviews, and then they have to disclose that. So that's another conversation. But these are the people that are soliciting, asking their customers, trying to get reviews. Over on the right, half of the audience is not asking, or shockingly, we don't have any reviews. So this is a group that is really not in control of its own reputation at all. Not doing anything really to address this very, very important area. And I think that that's understandable in part because business owners really don't know what the rules are. There's a lot of uncertainty about how to do this, how to ask. There's some discomfort that people may have. It may be awkward for them. They don't know the best practices. But this is a major problem. And for people that are working with small businesses, this is really something to address. Franchisees, small businesses. Okay, and now we're going to get into a side-by-side comparison. So we've gone through the consumer side, and the takeaways there are reviews are critical. People want to see timely responses. They want to see sufficient volume of reviews. They want to see a certain star rating threshold crossed. The businesses generally understand reviews are important, but they don't quite understand what to focus on, how to do it, and some of them are sort of clueless about issues like responding and how quickly to respond. So we see reviews are the #1 influence now on purchases, consumer purchases. But the business perception here, and this was not reflected in their earlier slides in this deck. We have this data, but we didn't put it in the deck previously. Business owner, what do you think is influencing consumer decision making? And they're saying social media, which could include reviews, but the way that we wrote this suggests that it doesn't. Search rankings, important variable. The website, that's a misperception generally in terms of the influence of business websites now. And then at #4, ratings and reviews. So there's a big gap there. So what is the impact on consumers? So just to reiterate, consumers relying on reviews very heavily. Businesses, as we saw in the earlier slide, almost 40%, really substantial minority, do not recognize the degree of influence of reviews on whether consumers buy from them. This gets a little more nuanced in these next couple of slides in terms of the consumers that are relying on reviews, always, usually, sometimes, versus the business perception. So what we see is there's a gap between what businesses think about how consumer behavior versus what consumers are actually doing. So only 13% understand that consumers always rely on reviews. Down below and more businesses think down in the sometimes row that reviews are much more casual influence, right? So that's another interesting point here. A lot of these businesses are thinking, well, consumers are going to look at reviews sometimes and not all the time, when in fact it's most of the time or all the time. Here's another kind of interesting discrepancy. So what's the minimum number of stars consumers are saying? As we saw earlier, 4 or more stars for most of them. But the businesses think that they can get away with a little bit, not as high, rankings not as high. So the business owners themselves think 3 or 3.5 stars will cut it. But there's a gap there between the consumers that won't consider them representing the business that they're potentially giving up. So if you have 3 stars, you're not even going to be considered by a lot of people, or 3.5 stars, which is quite a common rating. And as we discussed a little while ago, 40% of these respondents are saying businesses need to get back to me or respond to my review, my feedback, chiefly in a critical context, within 24 hours. That's very, very important. On the business side, a comparable number, as we saw, I respond when I can get to it, or a few days, maybe not at all. So the consequences of failing to address reviews and online reputation, as Monica discussed at the beginning, and as is abundantly clear from these slides, is if you don't have a strategy, you're not going to have as many reviews as the competitors. A lack of timely attention to critical reviews is going to mean lower ratings. Recall the 89% figure that would consider changing their response if somebody got back to them in a way that they felt happy with. It's a missed opportunity for win-backs, as I just said, and they're also not learning. I mean, one of the underappreciated points here that I mentioned earlier is there's a lot of really valuable information in these reviews for businesses, and especially in a small business or franchise context, service is really often the only differentiator for them. There's a lot of feedback that they're missing out on by not having a review strategy, not getting these reviews. We talked about the review threshold. If you fall below it, you're not going to be considered. Local SEO, you're not going to be seen. You're not going to rank as high because you don't have as many reviews, and your reviews are not as good. And this is a really tangible dollar value that we're actually working on, and we'll be publishing a follow-up document. This is going to translate into lost business in a very tangible way. One thing that is also interesting that's not in here in the slides, we did some drill downs in different verticals, personal care and home services and restaurants. And what we found is when consumers are faced with a specific use case, so as opposed to how important are reviews as an abstract matter to your decision making, when they're given specific examples, personal care, restaurants, home services, they're thinking about specific scenarios, then all of this stuff gets amplified. So in other words, people say they're more likely to say they always read reviews. They're more likely to say they need a higher star rating to choose a business. So with specific examples in mind, all of this gets sort of amped or pushed further. And now I'm going to go back to Monica for a discussion of what you do about all this stuff.
Thank you, Greg. So hopefully everybody had, really found those insights compelling. And we really didn't want to leave it there with, all of these gaps kind of unattended to. So what we wanted to try and do in this next section is talk about all of those great findings and insights that Greg just went over, and talk about what should a business do about these, and what are the best practices they should be taking forward. So to go to the next slide, we're looking at, we'll cover today 4 best practices when it comes to managing your local reputation. And it's going to touch on a lot of the insights that, again, we covered based on the research. So managing to the rating sweet spot, what is that and what does that mean? Making sure that you're managing the number of reviews that you have. And there are good and bad ways to do that. Greg kind of touched on it in his section. The recency of reviews absolutely matters. So your ratings and reviews can't be something you kind of forget about. It needs to be something that requires ongoing management to make sure you have a healthy reputation in market. And then number 4 is around the speed at which you need to get these responses out. And again, the importance of all of this is that when this is done well, even if you even if you find yourself in a situation where you have some bad reviews, you have the ability to turn that around. And this is, really why you want to make sure that you're being very active in managing these reviews on an ongoing basis. So we'll go into the first one, managing to the rating sweet spot. So per the 2 surveys, we know that that threshold is a 4-star. So consumers are looking for a minimum of 4 stars to even consider a business. That sweet spot that we talked about is between a 4.2 and a 4.5. So again, it is a very high bar that is set on, you know, what consumers are starting to expect in terms of your overall review rating. And some might think that that is, you know, unachievable. But the reality is, if you are managing your reputation, this isn't as easy, or sorry, this isn't as hard as you would think. What we found in other research is that the majority of times consumers will post a review, it's for a positive experience. And sometimes just making sure that your consumers are aware, you know, that, you know, you would love them to post a review, whether bad or good, sometimes is, you know, can make the difference. But you want to at least try and make sure that you're managing to that 4-star threshold. And again, for the research, 54% of consumers really need that to consider the business. In terms of the base of reviews, so how many reviews do you actually need? Well, the more the merrier. Again, you want to try and build that base ongoing. In fact, five reviews are required by Google, or you're on your Google My Business page in order to get an average rating. And almost half of consumers really need to see at least 10 reviews to really start to trust the overall rating score. Now, that's not the sweet spot. I wouldn't say you want just 5 to 10 reviews. You want as many as you can get. And the reason why that is because in the event that you do have a negative experience, the more reviews you have, the less that's going to impact your overall star rating. If you have a small base of reviews, even if it's 10 or 15, that one bad experience can really, you know, make your average rating fluctuate. So you want to try to build that base of reviews up. Again, when you look at best practices in doing that, a lot of the sites frown upon mass solicitation, which means that you are going out and asking people for a review. You might be incentivizing them, which is a no-no. The other, you know, practice that is a no-no is to ask your consumers if they had a good or bad experience, and only for those that had a good experience, then you ask them to leave a review. I think really what most of these sites are just trying to get around is, you know, an inaccurate picture of what this, you know, business is actually providing to consumers. So again, I think if you're making your consumers aware of the sites that you are rated on, again, I've seen, you know, businesses where they put that in their window, or they have cards at the register just saying, you know, our business runs on reviews, not incentivizing for a positive review, or vice versa. That's a good practice. The other thing is, and it ties back to response, but responding to people that have given you positive feedback and a positive review, responding back to them, thanking them, and even offering them, you know, a discount the next time they come in as thanks for doing that. I think that's also a best practice. And again, this is the type of thing that people will see and hopefully, you know, start to pay that goodwill forward. So on number 3, in regards to recency, so in our research, we talked about the fact that consumers expect to see more recent reviews. Well, what does that mean? Well, when you look at some other research, it means within the year, right? So anything older than a year, if you've got a good base of reviews, consumers typically don't go that far down. So they tend to look at all of the reviews that have happened within the year. So know that that's important. And just know that over 3/4 of your consumers are looking at the review dates as a measure of relevancy. So your recent reviews absolutely matter, and you absolutely need to make sure that you're, you know, finding ways, again, to remind your consumers that ratings and reviews are important to your business, per some of the suggestions I had given before. Number 4 is around response. And again, you know, Greg covered this, but responding is no longer a nice to have, it's a common courtesy. In today's day and age, consumers they're posting reviews, they're posting comments and questions, and they really do expect a response back. In fact, some of the platforms, for instance, Facebook is starting to actually, when you go to a local page now on Facebook, a little message box will pop up and will tell you if that business is typically able to respond within 24 hours. And so we're starting to see a lot of these platforms take notice of this expectation and starting to make sure that consumers know which businesses are taking care of that and which ones aren't. We haven't seen that yet be part of a ranking factor, but I can assure you that's coming. So a good practice is to try and respond to these reviews within 24 hours per the expectation. Okay, so you almost saw the sad face. We can go to that one now, Greg. So those are really the best practices. And one of the areas I would love to touch on is just the management of reviews in general, especially when you're talking about large multi-location brands. Managing your reviews is difficult enough if you're talking about a single location. When you think about managing all of the reviews and comments on not only Google My Business, but Facebook and Yelp and all of the other sites where your consumers are leaving those type of messages. And again, it's not to say that one is more important than the other. They actually are all very important. So wherever your consumers are leaving a review, you really have to be out there and managing it. Again, for a single location business, that might mean managing up to 7 to 8 different sites. When you think about a multi-location business that has hundreds or thousands of locations, you can see where that can get pretty unmanageable. The good news is there are really great technology platforms out there that can help multi-location businesses manage those needs. SOCi obviously being one of them. So to give you an idea of what some of this technology can do, it's able to give you things like the ability to discover and set reviews so that the most important conversations are really surfaced and can be responded to and managed appropriately. So for instance, within a platform like SOCi, if you want to make sure that any below 4-star reviews immediately set an alert and go to a certain person that needs to respond, you can do that within the tool. If you go to the next click, you can see kind of what that looks like. Sorry, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but it kind of shows how you can create certain rules on making sure that you can surface these important conversations. On the next slide, we can talk about setting deadlines on responses. So again, this is another key area that requires some oversight. As we mentioned within the research, responding to these reviews within 24 hours is pretty critical and can mean the difference between that negative review staying out there or that consumer coming back and changing that to a positive review. So having the ability to set a deadline, so whether you're managing them internally or you have delegated that to somebody within the business, setting an alert so you are notified if those responses haven't gone out within 24 hours to ensure that you are getting to those is obviously a pretty great feature and something that a lot of businesses would like to have if you're managing hundreds and thousands of these. The next feature that is really great, especially when you're talking about multi-location brands, is approvals. So we have a lot of different brands that we work with that really want to keep their locations involved in this process, right, and aware of what their reputation is. And if there's a local issue that occurred, it's really best practice to have somebody within the business, that local business, respond because they'll be best to speak to that issue with some authenticity. So with a tool like SOCi, you are able to actually allow your locations to participate in responding to reviews. And for those brands that are a little bit hesitant to do that because they're afraid that maybe the response wouldn't be handled correctly, or maybe they would say something that we're not quite comfortable with, within a tool like SOCi, you can set it where the response can be completed by your location, but it won't actually post live until you review and approve it. Again, a really powerful feature to help make sure that the brand has some oversight and can control the response and just make sure that everything is being handled. It's also a really great training opportunity to see what your locations would be responding and helping them to understand what is appropriate versus not appropriate. So again, that's just a couple of features that you could find in technology that could help you manage this process in a scalable and efficient manner. For anybody that's interested in learning more, we would definitely love to have that conversation. But in summary, I think the point of this research was to really talk about the importance of ratings and reviews and the impact it's having on your business. And it really comes down to, number one, searchability. Know that ratings and reviews are prominent in consumer searches and are becoming a top ranking factor in if your business is going to show up top or not. And so it's really important that you're managing those and that you know that it is impacting your search ranking. Visibility, that star rating, that average star rating. Again, visibility is going to, it's not just the average star rating, but as we discussed, the base of reviews will also impact your visibility. So for instance, if you're looking at a site and you have two businesses with a very similar average star rating, but one business has 2,000 reviews and the other has 200 reviews, guess which business gets the rank? It's the one with the larger base of reviews. So know that there are a number of factors that go into your visibility and make sure you're managing to those. And then responsibility, understanding that it is your responsibility to be aware that these reviews are out there and respond to them in an appropriate and a timely manner. Again, this can mean the difference between, being able to manage to that 4+ average star ratings or not. And as we've seen through prior research, this absolutely will impact your revenue and the business that you are seeing in market. And then finally, proactivity. As we had mentioned, this is not a set it and forget it type of a strategy. It requires proactive management. And there's a number of benefits in doing that, not just making sure your star ratings are there and that consumers are putting you in their consideration set, but these ratings and reviews are actually a really good indicator of issues that may be happening in market that, if addressed quickly, could really help trump or eliminate a crisis management situation. So again, just a number of different benefits to doing this. It is definitely not the easiest of programs to manage, but again, through some of the more powerful technology that is available in the space, it is absolutely manageable at a scalable and efficient manner. So that's what we have prepared for everyone today. As Greg had mentioned, we have the research in the slides. We didn't provide all the research, obviously, on this webinar because it would have run over 2 hours, but we've got a lot of really powerful insights that we cut up by vertical that you're going to actually be able to find in the research paper that will be launched next week. So check your email for that. For anybody that's attending this webinar, you will get a copy of that. But that research will be coming shortly.
So I want to thank everybody for their questions. I apologize to those that we didn't get to. You can email your questions to Monica at the email address you see on the screen. And thanks to everybody very much. Look for the rebroadcast and slides on Monday in an email, and look forward to future webinars. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody on the phone. Thank you very much, Monica. And thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, everyone.